Hello everyone, my name is Francisco Parada, and I'm currently enrolled in the Master's Program of Discourse Analysis and Academic Literacies of the Autonomous University of Tlaxcala. And today I'm going to present my research project, Developing Argumentative Skills under a Critical Literacy Approach in ELT Students.
Writing and argumentation have been present since the origins of Western civilization. Plato was one of the first authors to talk about arguments and their structure. He analyzed arguments in terms of the use of the language, formal connections, and rhetoric connections. We can say that he analyzed arguments in a holistic way. What was an argument for Plato? According to him, an argument should combine persuasion and truth-seeking. He stated very clearly this relation: there is no genuine art of the word without contact with the truth. A discourse that is well written, besides being well articulated, has to be truth-seeking. We have to remember that Plato criticized some discursive practices of his context, where politicians wrote arguments where the most important was persuasion, no matter if the argument was correct, incorrect, or it had no evidence at all, or it was poorly supported. Plato extended this criticism to the literacy process. He stated that a meaningful learning cannot be achieved just by reading, since letters printed on a paper can be taken as absolute, and a written text cannot defend itself. The philosopher distinguishes between rhetoric and dialectic. The last one requires an active role by teacher and student. Both participants should engage in dialogue, and I highlight dialogue. In this sense, an argument is both a process and a product, and some authors or some practices just take it as a product, whereas Plato highlights the importance of developing dialogue as a process. Critical literacy. This term is usually attributed to Paulo Freire, who assured that literacy implies the ability to read the world. Reading the reality always precedes the reading of the world, and the reading of the world implies reading the reality continuously. In this sense, reading and writing should help the learner to be aware of the reality and how it is socially constructed to discourse. Some traditional practices have seen as the teacher as the owner of the truth and students as mere recipients, closing the dialogue, thus closing the possibility for social transformation, which according to the philosopher should be the main goal of education. Being critically literate is important, but it is not enough to transform the reality. The most important here is to take action. In words of G, to change the social practices that historically have favored only a few. According to Freire, the ultimate goal of literacy is that a student can name the world in order to transform it. Argumentation can be a good way to engage students in dialogue and consequently transform the reality. It is important to mention that a critical approach to the teaching of the language accepts that discourse is much more than just linguistic aspects. It requires an understanding of how texts work and reproduce meaning in the social groups where they are produced and read. Therefore, teachers who adopt this approach need to consider social questions like equity, social justice, and transformation at the heart of literacy and education. The relationship between language, power, and identity should be taken seriously, and texts are not to be seen as canonic. And here is where argumentation can take a very important place. The objective of this project is to implement Toulmin's argumentation model to develop argumentation skills to promote a critical literacy approach in ELT students. Argumentation is a linguistic cognitive process because the argumentative operations are the body of reasoning, which also engage in dialogue. And in Toulmin's model, it is very important to consider the audience who the argument is directed. According to Bocconi, argumentation is important in education due to the fact that the more learners engage in different discursive practices, the better they are going to perform these practices. And consequently, they can acquire knowledge and principally build new knowledge. The development of argumentation in the process of academic literacy is particularly important since scientific knowledge is essentially argumentative. So, in order for students to participate in the construction of their knowledge of their community, it is important that they get familiar with argumentative skills, and most importantly, that they perform argumentative skills. And although traditionally students have been limited to use expository discourse, especially prior to higher education, argumentation can bring numerous benefits to scholar practices and even outside of the scholar context. Argumentation can bring different benefits. One of these is autonomous discourse and the construction of new knowledge. Some of the problems that students have is that they don't have a stance in their text. They are used to repeating others' discourse. So in this sense, if argumentation is considered as a core element in the process of learning, it is possible to believe that these skills can be developed. And besides producing new knowledge, other critical thinking abilities will sharpen, such as autonomous learning, cognitive skills, and a critical view in the scholar and social life. Toulmin points out the need to study the actual practice of argumentation. This is to say, Toulmin's model is involved in the field of informal logics. He states that formal logic is not enough to study the discursive and linguistic practices. For this purpose, he created a model that includes 6 elements. This is Toulmin's model, and we can see that it includes the classical structure of an argument, but he adds 2 more steps or 2 more stages where he includes rebuttal, since he states that no argument is conclusive and that any discourse as knowledge, it can be revisable. And it is important to mention that he also includes qualifiers. This is that some assertions or some claims can be or not supported. Academic writing is one of the most difficult activities students will face in their stay in the university. And even though this activity is very important because some interactions are carried out through written discourse, such as evaluations, feedback, interactions with teachers and students, and obviously academic text such as a thesis, students face serious limitations related to academic literacy. When students get to higher education, they are expected to have higher order skills. However, some studies show that students have poor competences in higher education. This is, of course, a multifactorial issue. Some studies have tried to summarize the difficulties they have with argumentative text in Mexican universities. These are some of the difficulties that some authors have discovered. As you can see, the list is very long, but we can summarize the difficulties like in 3 groups. The first is they take others' knowledge as canonic. They don't question experts, and they take this discourse as irrefutable. Another problem they may face is that they don't use personal appreciation. There is no personal stance. Their voice is not clearly seen in text. This is probably because in prior practices, students have been limited to use expository discourse. And the last difficulty we can see is that students have problems to cite and to use technical conventions. For example, connectors or contrastive words. The teaching of reflective thinking should promote abilities and activities allowed to produce qualified and supported arguments. In this sense, Toulmin's model offers a very clear description of how arguments are organized and most importantly, provides tools of analysis. Therefore, students are aware of what they are expected to do when writing an argument, and also they are able to analyze an argument, others' arguments, so that they can include their claims and their data in their own argument. Toulmin defines argument as revisable reasoning. This means that it is a discourse that reflects and makes predictions on its own condition of refutation. Toulmin states that there are no conclusive arguments, and all of them can be refuted. That's why he includes rebuttals in his model. This can help students to avoid the canonic voices in their discourse. This idea may be also applicable to education, where the idea is to give voice to the student, accepting that any knowledge seen as discourse may be revisable, and that argumentation may work as a magnifying glass, looking deeper into meaning and how it is reproduced. Another benefit in the implementation of Toulmin's model is that it can work as a heuristic. And in this sense, students may follow instructions, mental rules, or they can follow a mechanism in order to build an argument. This model may also work as a mechanism to reduce the uncertainty that produces the limitation to face the complexity of environmental stimulation. Students face a lot of frustration when they start writing arguments. In this sense, Toulmin's model can work as an outline for them to feel the stages or the steps that are necessary to build an efficient argument. The development of argumentative skills is a complex process that is obtained through high-order skills and the ability of the subject to carry out discursive and cognitive procedures, which involve thoughts, values, feelings, and beliefs. Language is the way in which experience becomes knowledge, according to Highland. Therefore, the promotion of argumentative and academic writing skills should be all around the curriculum. Classrooms and other academic settings are the ideal spaces to acquire argumentative skills as a way to achieve a wider literacy and a critical participation in the society. Argumentative skills can lead to the development of a full citizenship where students can have critical stance in academic and social matters, opening the door to social transformation. According to Beiserman, some of the benefits of promoting writing skills among university students are to perform better in writing classes, to promote learning in content classes, to promote critical thinking, and even some practical matters such as obtaining a degree. As we can see, argumentative skills will develop linguistic skills, but also will develop some other skills that will be life learning for students. There is empirical evidence that well-designed writing courses may work to promote argumentation skills in university students. The challenge here is to design courses that are appropriate for each context, and especially in a country like Mexico, where contexts are really different and students get to the university with heterogeneous literacy competencies, it is very difficult to design a writing course that meets the expectations of all the students. Of course, the development of argumentative skills will not be overnight. That is why it is important to design writing courses that are all across the curriculum and since the beginning of higher education, since it is proved that students get to the university with some limitations in their literacy competencies. The implementation of an argumentation model, it could be Toulmin's or it could be any other, can help students to build arguments that are efficient and that meet the expectations of their community of practice. The objective of this perspective is to promote more democratic educational practices, emphasizing the active participation of the students in the construction of the knowledge.
Academic writing is an intricate activity that involves several complex linguistic and cognitive processes, especially if we consider that students have poor literacy competences prior to higher education. This activity becomes even more difficult. The objective of the pedagogical intervention was to develop argumentative skills where students can analyze others' arguments and gradually they can build their own argument. The implementation of an argumentation model can help to promote linguistic abilities, but also critical thinking abilities that will help to have a critical stance on scholar issues and in a social context too.